Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Week 1 Monday Night Football Edition. We have most of the slate in the books, but still two big games left before we officially put a bow over Week 1. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider.
I don't deserve such fortune, getting to wake up Monday mornings and talking to you, buddy. What a world.
Well, I mean, full disclosure here, we are a little bit behind schedule. You decided that you wanted a little more time to clear your head and mentally prepare yourself for dealing with me this fine Monday.
Yeah, I had to sleep in just a touch. That's it. Got a couple extra minutes.
Kick things off with a winner. Kick things off with a winner around here. No reason to hang your head in any capacity, but I'm sure, as we get into the depths of what we saw unfold, plenty in the good, the bad, and the ugly. For those new to the Monday morning Bet the Board edition, we'll have some look-ahead lines, talk about where we've seen adjustments in the market, and of course tonight, the unique circumstances that we have not one but two Monday Night Football games. Want to thank everybody, Payne, for signing up for not only the 5K football free roll. We didn't get to the 4,000 threshold for a little bit of extra bonus money, but was pretty happy with all our listeners turning out for the 300th episode special prize that you offered up there.
Absolutely. So two things. One, and we can kind of reveal how the sausage is made a little bit, but obviously we give out just one best bet on the Thursday show. So we were sweating a little bit because the options, there was two of them. It was the Redskins and then the Cardinals. So when Washington got there, we're like,
the Washington football team.
We're doing this again. Oh, did I goofed there? Yeah. So
we knew it was going to happen. Inevitably knew it was going to happen around here, and it probably happened about 16 times during the course of the season. But I digress. Continue.
Without question. So we're sitting there watching these games, texting each other back and forth, and we're like, is this what we're going to do again this season? Because last year we would have debates. We'd always between one or two games that we had already bet, and we give out one, and we ended up flipping coins last year because we chose poorly on what we gave out. So we're like, is this really going to happen again? But fortunately, Arizona got there outright. The other thing, and it sucks, and it's just why it's so difficult to earn as a professional bettor, some of the best bets that you can possibly make are just restricted by limits. Like, I think we would have a field day if we had larger limits on props, because the one that we pinpointed in the preseason podcast that we literally said has at least a 20% edge, with Ryan Fitzpatrick being the week 1 starter cashed as well. So it was a good start to the season. In terms of the contest, it was a good turnout, I thought. And we increased the prize pool anyways just because we're nice guys. So that prize pool is up $6,000 for the season long, and then we have weekly prizes as well. So you can still sign up for that if you want to get in on the weekly prizes. Obviously, you'll be down potentially 5 games on the rest of the competition because you didn't fill out your form ahead of time. But the other thing we still have going, Todd, is the 300 contest giveaway for iTunes. So if you go to iTunes, leave a 5-star review and a nice little comment, we'll put that in an automator. $300 cash will go to 3 different folks that left 5-star reviews. So get those in now. It takes about a day to register, and we'll announce that on the Thursday podcast this week, the 3 winners.
And I'll be even more impressed, Payne, if we get somebody who enters the season-long contest can win spotting the field a 5-game head start. So a hat tip to anybody out there who likes to take on an ambitious and aggressive endeavor. Like Payne said, encourage everybody to get in there. Still plenty of weekly prizes available for the taking. Want to get into some of the good, the bad, and the ugly for what you saw transpire so far during the course of Week 1, my friend?
Yeah, let's go for it. You lead the way.
All right, we're going to start glass half full, and I want to go to the game that was our best bet and highlight DeAndre Hopkins' debut for the Arizona Cardinals, because Kyler Murray, I know we talked at great lengths before jumping on this morning, for the better part of 2.5 quarters looked out of sync, looked ill-equipped to make some of the decisions and big plays that you'd expect from a quarterback entering his second season. But Hopkins finishes the game with 14 catches for 151 yards, clearly seems to be on the same page as Kyler Murray right out of the gates, against a good, albeit slightly overrated 49ers defense. And you look at their 29 first downs as a team, 180 yards rushing. Of course, 90 of those come from Kyler Murray. A good debut for a fresh face in a new place, and a lot of optimism in the desert for the Arizona Cardinals.
Thank God for Kyler's legs. As you pointed out, he was horrific the first 2.5 quarters, especially with some of his decision-making. He was off on some of his throws. He actually had an expected completion percentage that was negative yesterday, so wasn't the best throwing the ball, but did enough, especially with his legs. And the one thing that really stood out to me was San Francisco, and partly why we played this game, was their lack of weapons. So no Deebo Samuel, no Brandon Ayuk, possibly their top two guys, Jalen Hurd on IR, and then late in the second quarter, it looks like George Kittle gets hit, hyperextends his knee, comes back, but doesn't have a catch in the second half. So that was intriguing to me. Isaiah Simmons got beat up as a rookie a little bit, 2 blown coverages there.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
There's no doubt it's going to happen. He ain't playing at Clemson anymore there, my friend.
No, but you look at the overall yardage there, and San Francisco does average 6 yards per play, Arizona just 5.2. But if you remove the 76-yarder to Mostert, who apparently set a record for speed on that catch and run, there wasn't a lot from San Francisco's offense. You had the 3rd and goal draw that picked up 18 yards from about the 19. You had the pass interference on 3rd and 10 from Hicks, which extended that late drive. So there wasn't much from San Francisco's offense. Jimmy G needs to be a little bit better, get the ball out quicker, get it out on time. There was a couple instances where he was just late with throws or threw it behind. But from what I am hearing, San Francisco could be a pretty nice fade early in the season.
Well, we'll find out, because it's going to take brass balls to bet against them this week, but you have to imagine the Jets will be significantly better. However, though, wanted to get your take, obviously. I have a couple more here in terms of things that impressed me and kind of opened my eyes, but what stood out to you?
Well, I think the first thing, because we've been hammering it home for so long, and it's a really good sign, Seattle could make a playoff run this season if the pass rush situation gets figured out defensively. But what I was thrilled to see was the Seahawks offense finally put it in Russell Wilson's hands early and often. Brian Schottenheimer, Pete Carroll, after years of talking and shaking their head yes. It's kind of what Todd does. Todd yeahs me when I say things. This is effectively what Brian Schottenheimer and Pete Carroll had done for the last few years. Juan, are you going to throw the ball more with the best quarterback in football? They finally did it. And if you look in the first half, on 1st and 2nd down, Seattle threw the ball 67% of the time. Last season on 1st and 2nd down, they threw it just 51% of the time in the first half. So a major uptick there. And that's going to bode really well for this offense as long as you just keep putting it in the hands of Russell Wilson.
Do we want to start the Fire Dan Quinn chant already? We know Atlanta was a trendy side from professional bettors, ultimately closing a 1.5 point favorite after the line had leaked out to Seattle as much as -2 during the course of the week.
Specifically one group. Let's just put it that way. Now, they have a lot of influence, and that was a big game day move. But I got to tell you, their stuff hasn't been the greatest. So I know we both talked, and we're like, geesh, now that Seattle's a dog, maybe we should put them into teasers. Never ended up doing it, but poor decision there. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Would have paid dividends in that regard, but still week 1, plenty of weeks to try and continue to correct some of those mistakes that are out there. Another thing that I thought was positive in his New England Patriots debut, Cam Newton went out there. Wasn't spectacular, but looked like he had a grasp of the offense, and you give the Patriots credit. I mean, they took advantage of Cam's legs, turned him into a runner. 42 attempts as a team for 217 yards on the ground. Cam Newton led the way with 15 carries for 75 yards. And I think he probably could have had a better stat line than what he was able to produce. You mentioned it, N'Keal Harry dropping a ball, which should have been another touchdown pass to Cam's credit.
where the Dolphins are a little soft still defensively is right in the belly. And that's where the Patriots attacked. It was a physical game. And the one thing that we discussed in this preseason preview was the best part of the Patriots offense is their O-line. They're just going to have to outman and out-physical other teams. And honestly, this wasn't overly close. The N'Keal Harry, as he's extending to score a touchdown, fumbles it through the end zone at the half-yard line, and the games at that point would just be done and over. But the momentum shift off that, the Dolphins go down, score a touchdown, and it looks closer than the game actually was. So I was pretty impressed with Cam Newton. 2 rushing touchdowns, would have had another passing if not for N'Keal Harry. And they dominated this game on the ground. 5.2 yards a carry, had a 67% success rate on the ground, 7 explosive runs. So the ground game led by Cam Newton and Sony Michel did real well, especially just running right at the Dolphins. That's one thing we're going to want to watch for, is just the interior of that defensive line. You're hoping Christian Wilkins and Devin Godchow can take that next step and be a dominant force on the interior, but they weren't in week 1.
And of course, we'll see New England on full display, just how far they've come during the Cam Newton era against the aforementioned Seattle Seahawks, a game that should be one of the highlights of the week 2 schedule. Payne, what else in the positive variety were you pretty impressed with week 1 that you didn't see coming as we broke down the card earlier in the week?
Because they're so passionate, we're going to give them a little something here. We're going to give Bills Mafia a little pat on the back for Josh Allen. And I think he looked good, all things considered. The completion rate, 1.5% above expectation. Now, I want to see this against competent teams. If you, that's the big caveat there. I think he looked good. He got the ball out on time. He was accurate. But this is a Jets defense in a shortened offseason that lost its best 2 players. So you're down Jamal Adams, obviously, via trade to Seattle. C.J. Mosley opted out. And without preseason games, Greg Williams had to figure out who's going to replace my 2 leaders, both vocally and on the field. And they didn't find that answer. But it was a good start for Buffalo and Josh Allen. They're going to need to be a little bit better because I don't know if the defense is going to be as good. And we talked about that a little bit on the preview podcast. It's going to be a very good defense. I don't know if it's going to be that elite top 5 type of unit, but we'll see.
Yeah, you want to talk about a final score yesterday that wasn't indicative of how the football game went. I think the Jets and Bills become the ultimate poster child. 27-17 in the box score, but the game was nowhere near that close from start to finish. But a hat tip to anybody who may or may not have wanted to tease the Jets up in this particular spot.
I don't think
to go against public consensus.
Todd, I don't think anybody knew Jamison Crowder could run that far. I mean, typically he's the guy that has 13
it's 5
catches.
Yards and go down.
Yeah, he has about 13 catches, averages about 4.2 a catch. I didn't know he could run that far. And I don't think he did either. He was huffing. He was like looking back. He's like, I'm not sure I'm going to make it, Captain.
A PPR phenom for those out there that love their garbage time yards. Jamison Crowder will be the poster child for all of those things. And you talked about a loyal fan base in Bills Mafia who had a lot to be excited about yesterday. There's another loyal fan base right on the shores of Lake Michigan who I think was ready to go out there and give away Mitchell Trubisky for absolutely nothing. Suddenly, like Lazarus or rising from the dead or a phoenix from the ashes, he puts together a 21-0 comeback in the 4th quarter against the Detroit Lions, erasing a 23-6 deficit. The Bears finished the game with touchdowns on 3 of their final 4 drives, all touchdown passes from Mitchell Trubisky, and arguably the biggest one, he finds Anthony Miller, drops the ball into a bucket, and if you're a Bears fan, you're sitting there going, where the hell has this been for the better part of 3.5 quarters?
I'm not going to lie. I was calling for Nick Foles midway through the 3rd.
No. Let's be honest. It was earlier than that, I think. If I have to go back and look at my timestamps over text message, I think you were calling for Nick Foles earlier than that.
It was brutal. And again, we'll peel back the curtain here, but we bet this over. And there was a group against us, and we didn't get the best closing line. And we felt like there was going to be some unknowns to the outside world that would benefit us with the usage of some tempo and some pre-snap motion. And we got all that. And the offenses were just moving the ball at will. It just became a field goal fest. early on in that game. And the second half over was probably one of the better bets you could have made. But I'm sitting there watching this unfold, and this just isn't anything new to Detroit fans. Like, you have to feel so bad, and it's tough to talk about this because you can't assign a number to it, right? We can always talk about, like, this team, this organization, they're a winning organization. And it's kind of narrative-based talk, and all of the math guys hate it because you can't assign a value to it. But the reality is, if you look at historic data here, Detroit was the 4th team since 2006 to blow a 17-point lead entering the 4th quarter. Teams in that situation were 779 and 3 before yesterday. And the one thing we talked about on the preseason podcast, Todd, and why we thought Detroit would have some positive regression was obviously Matthew Stafford playing all 16 games. But last year, even with Stafford out, through 13 weeks, there was only 2 teams that led at some point in the second half of every single game. It was Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and it was this Lions team. And Detroit went 3-8-1 over those 13 weeks, and they're starting out on the wrong foot again here.
Hey, nothing wrong picking up right where you left off. DeAndre Swift, by the way, welcome to the NFL. I'm not sure you're going to have a ball dropped into your hands in a more pivotal juncture being that wide open for as long as you are a running back at this level, which I guess Payne, provides us this segue. We want to give the Bears credit. We'll take shots at the Lions. Anything else of the good variety that you want to hit on before we become a little bit more negative this fine morning?
No, I think that's it. That hits me off the top of my head. I think the 2 biggest things for me, obviously there was a lot of good, there was a lot of bad. There was, I think, a wide variance of things. We could be talking about, 10 different things if we wanted to, but Josh Allen and Buffalo's offense was a positive to me. Seattle throwing the ball a little bit more, and we're talking about 2 teams that potentially could make some deep playoff runs. Aside from that, nothing was too glaring in the positive realm. Obviously, I could gush at my man crush Patty Mahomes just doing it again on Thursday Night Football, but I'm going to refrain from doing that.
You know what? Patrick Mahomes is going to put up gaudy numbers and make Herculean plays throughout the entire course of his career, but you can't compare him to other quarterbacks. You have to compare him to himself. And so that's what's going to keep him out of this section every Monday, so you don't end up having about 60 to 90 seconds gushing over him. Now, if you're able to sell barbecue spots to a Kansas City barbecue restaurant that wants to sponsor the Patrick Mahomes 60-second, 90-second, 2-minute drill, then I'm all ears to allow you to go through and list off all of his accolades game in, game out.
I gotta tell you, my favorite condiment is ketchup, but I'm a Heinz guy. I literally almost changed to Hunt's, which is not very good. I'm gonna put it that way, just for him.
I'm not gonna lie, you could put 9,000 ketchups in front of me, I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference in terms of what was
the
what.
one thing about Thursday night, and we're going off topic here a little bit, but the tackling was absolutely horrific. It's something we want to monitor. I haven't downloaded all the league-wide tackling from all the games yesterday yet, but there were 26 missed tackles in that Thursday night game. So that's something that we're seriously going to have to monitor here. But in terms of Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid deserves most of that credit. 21 of Mahomes' 32 throws were fewer than 5 yards down the field. He only attempted 1 deep throw all night, if you can believe that.
Well, that's part of the reason that, you look at his yardage numbers, they didn't blow anybody away. He came up well short of his prop total, which was set in the 300. So something the Bears watching as you look at Kansas City play a little bit more clock control like we saw in the latter portions of last year's regular season before they got themselves into big holes in the playoffs, and we saw how dynamic that team can be in terms of making plays in that regard.
Let me ask you this.
With the good... Sure, fire away.
After you saw the usage of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, how are you feeling about Tyreek Hill in the second round of your fantasy draft?
I'm not thrilled right about now. I'm pretty sure that I'll see how my first round pick pans out tonight in Derrick Henry, but coming from someone who may not have made the best managerial choices, whether it was at the quarterback position this week or the last-minute substitution, putting Amari Cooper on my bench in favor of DJ Chark, who I thought was poised for a great game, we'll see. Henry needs about 23 points, which isn't out of the realm of possibility, albeit a long shot, to keep this dynasty on the tracks. But we're no strangers around this fine fantasy team, starting slowly and picking up when things need to get going. And hey, let's be honest, with the injury to Marlon Mack, you hate to see it. The upside for Jonathan Taylor just became immense, and for a late-round pick and J.K. Dobbins getting to the end zone twice, wouldn't shock me in the least, Mr. Payne, if Mark Ingram was RB2 in Baltimore before we get out of the month of September.
Dobbins looks pretty good. But I'm thinking back now. You had the option of Julio in round 2 and Thielen in round 4, and it was Tyreek and Cooper instead. So that could hurt.
It'll sting a little bit, and watching the tight end position that was a constant last year with George Kittle, instead of electing to rely on Chris Herndon this year, that may come back to rear its ugly head, but thankfully there are potential trades out there. It's only week 1. No sense in panicking just yet, which should be the same message we convey to the fans in Indianapolis who watch the division-favored Indianapolis Colts as 7-point road favorites go down to North Florida and come up with a giant goose egg, losing that game 27-20. Phillip Rivers throws for 363 yards, 2 costly interceptions. Of course, mentioned that they may lose Marlon Mack, MRI pending, with a potential torn Achilles. You dig into that box score, they outgained the Jags by more than 200 yards, a net yards per play advantage of plus 1.3. But Payne, mistakes, miscues, and players acting like idiots reared their ugly head for the Colts.
I'm disgusted. I feel so bad for Chris Ballard. I really do, because you look at this box score, 6.4 yards per play to 5.1, outgained him by nearly double the yards, and they just throw up on themselves again. And I know we'll all look at Phillip Rivers throwing the 2 costly picks, but there was a lot more at play here. And you had Blankenship miss a chip shot field goal. You had Paris Campbell lose his mind when momentum started to swing in their favor, picks up, I don't know, it was about a 15-yard catch and decides that he's the strongest man in the world, is going to flex on Miles Jack and picks up a 15-yard penalty and sets the offense back. A couple possessions later, he gets stopped 1 yard short of a defensive of the first down mark by a defensive back that probably weighed 163 pounds with pads on. No flex there after that. And then you had T.Y. Hilton in a contract year drop a 4th and 4 pass. So there was a lot at play here. We knew going into this game there was a little late money on Jacksonville, taking it from about 8.5 down to 7 because some lingering issues along the offensive line. The line was all out there, but 3 of their key cogs are dealing with some issues. They're not 100%, and they didn't quite get that push in the ground game. And so I don't know what to make of this, but it's another blown lead late in the second half. This is something that hurt the Colts down the stretch last year. If you remember, they were 5-2, number 2 seed in the AFC through 8 weeks last year. And they held a bunch of halftime leads, a bunch of fourth quarter leads, 7 of 9 games to end the year. They either led at halftime or in the fourth quarter. Won 2 of them. And they start that again in week 1 here against Jacksonville. So pretty disappointing performance there. You could also tell a little bit late, Todd. I don't know if you watched it. I only watched the latter part. But the one thing that concerned me just a touch was early in the season.
Heat, humidity, baby.
A dome team playing in the Florida humidity. And it just looked like that final stanza, quarter and a half or so, Jacksonville just had more energy. They showed a little bit more effort. They just looked like they were in better shape at that point.
I have to give credit to the Jaguars. It's a team that's not ultra talented. They do have some fun skill position players offensively. They went out there, made plays. Gardner Minshew, you had a stat, Payne. What was it? I don't want to butcher it for you.
I don't know what it was. I saw it yesterday, so I won't take credit for it, but I'm 99% certain it was Gardner Minshew was the first quarterback in NFL Week 1 to throw for 3 touchdowns and complete 95% of his passes. That was the first time in NFL history. Week 1, 3 touchdown passes, 95% completion rate in NFL history.
It's always interesting. We saw it last year with the Dolphins that, hey, sometimes the talent isn't on par anywhere close, but you can offset an absence in talent with overall energy and effort, and we saw a little bit of that from the Jags yesterday. We'll see if it continues next week when they have another divisional game where they have to go on the road to take on Tennessee. In terms of other bad, we talked about at great lengths, Payne, that we knew the Vikings defense was going to be a work in progress, to put it quite mildly. This was a team trailing 29-10 going into the fourth quarter. The box score a little bit misleading again here as they amassed yards and plenty of points in garbage time. They actually averaged 7.8 yards per play, but I don't think there was a more misleading stat line than that from Minnesota's offense when you consider the fact that Kirk Cousins, I believe at halftime, had attempted 6 passes and had less than 50 yards. Green Bay did what they wanted when they wanted, and Devontae Adams looked like he was playing against air for extended stretches.
It was an absolute blowout. The final score is extremely misleading, as you alluded to. And the issue that we thought Minnesota had coming into the season, and the reason we played them under 9 wins and gave it out as a best bet, the Vikings corners, I don't know what to expect there. You're looking at a bunch of young guys trying to learn this complex scheme from Zimmer, and sure enough, they struggled. Green Bay's passing offense averaged 8.3 yards per attempt, a 57% success rate. They had 5 explosive passes. And why that's glaring and where most of it happens is against the cornerbacks, because the safety position's absolutely loaded. And you're also looking at another area of concern that we outlined on the preview podcast, and it showed up in spades week 1, but it's the loss of Linval Joseph, and then going out and inking Michael Pierce to $9 million, and then he opts out. So you have a huge hole in the middle of the run defense. Green Bay had 4 explosive runs and a 66% rushing success rate as well. So they're having issues stopping the run up the middle, which isn't shocking, and then they're having trouble defending pass on the outside. It's something to monitor the rest of the season, but I don't know how much better it's going to get. You're hoping is that the young guys on the outside start to pick up Zimmer's system a little bit more as the season rolls on.
Well, we'll see. We have the Xavier Rhodes revenge game on Sunday where the Colts put their own record on the line and welcome in the Minnesota Vikings. So something will have to give between those two teams. As far as the bad, before we get into the ugly, Randy Bullock, missed field goal as time expired. Joe Burrow suffers his first loss as a quarterback in the National Football League and his first loss overall since late November 2018. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, the Chargers are on the right side of kicking luck in a pivotal game situation, so they escaped Cincinnati with a win. And then, Payne, of course, the marquee game of the day was the Bucs and Saints, and we talk about misleading finals all the time. No idea how those two teams that barely got close to 300 yards, the Bucs finished with 310 yards, the Saints 271. Neither team runs the ball for more than 3.5 yards per carry. Neither team averages more than 5 yards per play. And suddenly we have a game that shatters the closing total at 48.
So I just want to ask, the Bullock situation, did you watch that last play?
You know what? I didn't see it in real time. I saw them lining up for a field goal. I looked away and then saw him hobbling off the field. So do we think he was injured, or that was the sympathy hobble after missing the chip shot field goal?
So he misses the chip shot field goal and immediately grabs the calf. He caught a cramp, or there's a calf strain. I didn't see the post-game interview, but it's been known that guys in Ohio after losses have excuses and they show up to like press conferences with a cast on their wrist. So I don't know if Bullock took the route of LeBron and like showed up with some type of device around his leg or not in the postgame, but yeah, completely missed the field goal. Soiled Burrow's opener. AJ Green got called for a push-off. Fantastic catch. Debatable push-off. I don't know there. In terms of some of the other ugly stuff, I think you go back to Dan Quinn. I don't know, man. He's got to go. The defense wasn't any better. Allowed 57% of plays to grade successful. And the one thing that they've had issues with was covering running backs. Chris Carson goes out and has 2 receiving touchdowns. Eagles' offensive line, certainly some room for concern there. Carson Wentz was under pressure all day long, but he wasn't good either. If you look relative to the pressure, which is incorporated and expectation completion percentage, Wentz was still 11% below expectation. If you remove the 3rd and a mile to Rieger, there wasn't much in the way of offense especially in the second half. I think the other offensive line we got to look at a little bit here, Todd, is the Dallas Cowboys. Went into that game, obviously, the loss of Travis Frederick retiring. You had issues at right tackle with La'el Collins, and then his replacement went down. So Dak was under pressure all game. In terms of Tampa and New Orleans, didn't watch a ton of that game. Am going to go back today and probably watch it in its entirety. But both quarterbacks struggled a little bit, kind of what you would expect. We'd seen the Saints the last 17 games in weeks 1 or 2 really, really struggle out of the gates. I think the positive is Alvin Kamara looks really healthy. The one thing we pinpointed on the week 1 preview was they want to get Alvin Kamara the ball a little bit more now that he's healthy, and they want to use him in the screen game. And so I did see the Alvin Kamara screen touchdown, so that was good to call out and then see come to fruition. Tampa's offense struggled, right? 4.8 yards per play, 48% success rate. Didn't look fully in rhythm. I really want to see what this Mike Evans, Tom Brady relationship looks like, what it materializes into. I know Mike Evans is fantastic, but there were a number of times last year where Jameis throws picks and Mike Evans just isn't on the same page, whether he cuts off his route, whether he doesn't know the route he's supposed to be running. And we just accredit it to Jameis because, he's just so inaccurate and he's such a gunslinger and he turns it over so much. It's always his fault. But we saw the Tom Brady interception, and it's Mike Evans doesn't know the route. He doesn't know where he's supposed to cut it off. He cuts the route short. So that relationship's going to be interesting. Hopefully Tom Brady can help Mike Evans become a little bit cleaner of a receiver. We know what a freak talent he is, but he needs to be a little bit better in some of his decision-making with where he's cutting off routes.
Yeah, kudos to our friend of the program, Warren Sharp, for pointing that out. I mean, I saw him clip that off when Mike Evans runs the wrong route. Troy Aikman immediately points the finger at the wide receiver rather than Tom Brady, but we know if that was Jameis Winston out there, it would have shown as a horrible pick and contributing to the 30 interceptions that were there. Didn't catch that in real time as I was watching the game on mute, but definitely interesting. You mentioned the Eagles. Payne, after building that 17-0 lead, I had to go back in because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss something. Their final 11 drives of the game, they ran 40 offensive plays, amassed a grand total of 100 yards. We know this Washington football team's defense is going to be good, but as you said, Wentz has to be a little bit better, has to hold himself to a higher standard, and even with a depleted skill position core and an offensive line, you got to average more than 2.5 yards per play.
Where we thought the Redskins defense was really strong was in the defensive line, and that proved to be the case. Couple costly penalties, jumping off sides, trying to get off the line as they were trying to eat all game long. So there's a couple boneheaded penalties, which you would expect from some young guys like Young and Sweat. But to your point, if you look at the the third and fourth quarters of this game, Philadelphia's offense was abysmal. It was non-existent. Carson Wentz, we need to look at him as a leader, and he's just not doing it right now. Came out strong. The script was fantastic. They rolled the 2 tight end sets. Goddard's an absolute animal, and it posed some issues for a linebacking core in Washington that was a little bit banged up. But in the second half of this game, Philadelphia averaged 2.8 yards per play, 90 total yards on 32 offensive plays. So that offense needs to be a little bit better. They need to get the offensive line situation figured out. Hopefully Lane Johnson returns and provides some type of protection at right tackle. And that's going to be the saving grace. But you look at this division now. We thought this was a 2-horse race between Dallas and Philadelphia. Both those teams have issues. So it's going to be interesting. Maybe Washington trends a little quicker than we thought. We thought Haskins was better than what the national narrative was when we did our preseason breakdown. Big opening game win. Scott Turner getting a little bit more familiar with his weapons and quarterback. If you can get any semblance of production out of that secondary for Washington, this could be a sneaky team.
Going to be interesting to see how they're priced going forward. We see them as big underdogs this weekend as they'll head out to the desert to take on Arizona. I'm not that optimistic about Washington and where they are offensively because they clearly didn't light the world on fire. You do have to give their defense credit. They created short fields, and oftentimes you need to capitalize when opportunities there, and they did so as 6-point underdogs as you mentioned earlier, winning that game outright with 27 unanswered points to close. But a hat tip also to Ron Rivera, who guts out his cancer treatment, gets an IV at half, and makes sure that he's ready to coach this team, showing a little bit of toughness. And if your player's in that locker room and you see what your coach is going through, I think you respond pretty positively to that, and you'd have to imagine a massive upgrade on the sidelines in terms of what can be expected from this team, despite a lot of dysfunction in the front office. From the good, the bad, and the ugly, Payne, anything else that you wanted to touch on before we kind of pivot a little bit into a quick hitter on some of the look-ahead numbers and how the market's adjusted after 60-minute sample sizes?
No, I think that's it. Let's get into the look-ahead lines.
All right, Thursday night, a game that we'll cover in great detail here on the Bet the Board podcast between the Browns and Bengals. Look-ahead number had the Browns listed as a 7.5-point favorite. Number at FanDuel, 6 early this morning, seen it tick down to 5.5. Obviously, people not all that enamored with the performance they saw from Cleveland in season debut as the Baltimore Ravens bludgeoned them into a bloody pulp in a 38-6 win.
The Browns were the sharp side in this game against Baltimore. And I was just too hesitant. I wasn't quite sure of the reports that I was getting that Baker Mayfield and this offense were ready, learning a brand new system. Even though the system really fits the skill sets of these guys, I was just a little hesitant on what we would see testing out this new offense in a shortened offseason against a defense like Baltimore. And so I'm happy we kind of evaded that landmine. But when you look at a short week game, young quarterback, young team. Now, it's not a lot of travel for Cincinnati, but I think the situation bodes well for Cleveland. And the one thing that we're really going to have to monitor here is we know the Browns want to run the ball from their heavy sets. And Geno Atkins was out week 1, and then in the third quarter, DJ Reader was carted off, the $53 million man that Cincinnati signed to plug the middle of that defense. So there's potential for the 2 interior linemen to be out in this game, so you're going to have to monitor that situation. And if they're both out, I think it bodes pretty well for the Browns' ground game.
Yeah, I think this is a game that Cleveland, if you're going to be serious and think about even flirting with a postseason berth, you hate to call it a must-win in week 2, but you get the Bengals after they were absolutely gutted. I'm very curious to see where this number ultimately settles. As I said, don't want to spend too much time on this, as we'll do a deep dive as part of the Thursday football podcast later this week. Buffalo Bills, they head down to your neck of the woods. Look-ahead number had the Bills a 3.5-point road favorite for their annual trip to South Beach. That number balloons out to 5.5. You had 2 very disparate results. You mentioned earlier, Miami, not nearly as close as the 21-11 final score indicated, and the Buffalo Bills, their final score, 27-17 victory, not nearly as close as their game against the Jets.
Right. And you're going to have to monitor the Devontae Parker situation. Left the New England game this past week. So that would be a big loss. You need Fitzpatrick to really cut out the turnover situation. We know he's a little bit of a gunslinger, smart guy, but he turns the ball over just a touch too much at times. But you do have him and Chan Gailey in a nice little revenge situation going against the Bills, an organization that didn't think either of those guys were good enough. And so this will be interesting to see where this line goes. And again, early season game in the Florida humidity. Not quite sure where this closes. Potentially one we discuss on Thursday, though.
I think we'll discuss this game on Thursday as well, so just wanted to bring it up. As we saw, the Colts, a 2.5-point favorite on a look-ahead line. Current number this morning at FanDuel, the Colts -3. Half-point move on the surface, albeit onto a key number. You mentioned the Colts' offensive line injuries, and I think that'll be indicative ultimately where this price closes.
Absolutely. What you're going to see here is you got a beaten and battered Vikings defensive line against an injured Colts offensive line. You're going to have to monitor some of these injury situations. The Colts were able to move the ball through the air. So that becomes the concern, obviously, when you're looking at a Vikings secondary. Are they going to be able to get that cleaned up in 1 week's time? Don't have too much on this one, Todd, but as you alluded to, the reason we're talking about it, even though it's just a half tick, that move from 2.5 to 3, the most valuable in football. So it is a large move at this point, despite just a half tick.
And this game, I don't think, is going to crack the rotation on Thursday unless something major changes. The Baltimore Ravens on the road taking on the Houston Texans. Houston, extra time to prepare for this matchup. Look-ahead number had the Ravens 5-point road favorites. As of this morning, we're out to a full touchdown at FanDuel. And this, one of the bigger blowouts that we saw in the Houston Texans schedule last season. Baltimore beat them like an absolute drum.
So you have revenge. You have a little extra time to prepare. You have the angle of the 0-1 team versus the 1-0 team. I'm not sure I can back Bill O'Brien, but at some point here, whenever this number eventually stops, I do think the Texans probably end up with some money on them.
All right, from a team that may end up with money on them later in the week to two games that you can actually bet on tonight at FanDuel. You're looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers, the first game of the Monday Night Football Twin Bill, a 6-point favorite in the game against the New York Football Giants. Total in this contest has been bet down from 47 on the open down to 45. And Payne, first and foremost, before we get into some of the X's and O's, I want to talk a little bit about this line movement. We saw FanDuel open it earlier this summer with the Steelers a 3.5-point favorite. Obviously, that was with speculation that there were going to be fans in the building. Of course, no fans at MetLife for tonight's contest. Price leaks out. Big Ben reports seem to be pretty favorable. Road favorites last season, 6-1 against the spread on Monday Night Football. Suffice to say, it's a combination of factors that have created such a big number on Pittsburgh laying nearly a touchdown on the highway.
A little bit of everything. In addition to what you said, Mike Tomlin's been an absolute monster on Monday Night Football for whatever reason. Pittsburgh has owned this day of the week. But I also think, and I'm not sure we see it get there, but I think there was an attempt. I have to choose my words carefully here. Once there was an idea of where this was going to go and where the public was going to come in, I think it was about getting out early on a good number and potentially playing the middle game. And I don't think books are going to be... Let's just put it this way. I think books are going to be smart enough not to get themselves caught in a position where they're giving you 7 on the Giants and creating this large middle around some key numbers. So Pittsburgh certainly took some professional money at a significantly better number. And I think the goal there was to earn a little bit as well, potentially on coming back and taking the Giants at 7. We're seeing a little early morning money on Pittsburgh, or on the Giants rather. And it's down to 5 at some sharp shots, 5.5 at some other sharp shots. So I'm intrigued to see where this ultimately closes.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the Giants' money came in as early as it did so far today. But these days, I mean, nothing shocks me in terms of market movement. Rather than letting the public drive this thing up, we know guys get itchy trigger fingers and want to try and jump on some of these contests. When you look at the Giants, this is a franchise.
You're really hitting me with some questions
record
today that I've done the PC dance pretty well here.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty impressed. I like to see you dance between the raindrops on a Monday morning. It's entertaining to me. The only thing we're lacking is video footage to see exactly what's going on from your facial expression standpoint.
Oh, yeah. It's like, what the fuck is Todd asking me about this for? As I sit here in my boxer shorts. Shirt off. I went shirt off today for recording.
Oh, that's a visual. That's a visual none of us need. Thank you now for ruining my Monday. I'm glad I've eaten before we recorded the podcast.
I got to tell you, I went the opposite way in the lockdown situation. There was like one of 2 ways you could head, where either just like stuff in the face. I went the opposite way. I started working out again, trying to get in like a better mental position.
The Nikola Jokic, slim down, drop massive amounts of weight, come back cut, jacked, and think you're going to compete for Mr. Olympia.
I don't know about competing for Mr. Olympia, but the DNA is no longer like 78% marinara and carbs.
When you look at the Giants, this franchise has the worst record in the NFL over the last 3 seasons. They've compiled a record of 12-36. It doesn't get much better when you look at how they've started this season, just 1-8 straight up, 2-7 against the spread in the last 9 season openers. And when you talk about the New York Giants as a home underdog, you begin to wonder where the home field advantage actually is. 1-10 against the spread the last 11 games. And I believe The Athletic put out an article earlier this offseason that say the EPA for the Giants in terms of their home games, they're dead last in the National Football League. You mentioned some of Mike Tomlin's success in prime time, but keep in mind that the Steelers have covered the spread just 36% of the time as road favorites over the last 3 seasons. And I think, Payne, when we try and handicap the Giants and figure out what they're going to be this year, the number one question you have to ask, what kind of realistic expectations can we have for Joe Judge, who gets elevated to his first head coaching position?
I think we're just going to see a team that's motivated a little bit more. I think he brings a level of professionalism with him from New England, and it's going to be about energy, effort, playing hard, and playing smart. And I think that's going to be the difference. From what I have heard, overall, there's just been a lot more energy in the locker room. Guys have bought in. Now, that works well, but now you got to go out in the field. And hopefully, if you don't start losing a slew of games, that changes. But that's the model that he's brought over from New England. It's bring your hard hat and lunch pail to work. And we saw clips on social media, right, where he's getting down and dirty with the team and they're loving life. They sprinkled some mud and threw a ball in there, and he's diving into the mud. So it seems like at this point, and we haven't played a game yet, that he's at least getting buy-in. And that's the goal, to change the direction of the franchise and to change the mindset. And hopefully that bodes well for New York, because it's been just a horrific team the last few seasons.
We can start on either side of the ball. I'm not quite sure which makes more sense. Probably with the Steelers offense, with Big Ben returning under center. Against the Giants defense, that was nothing short of horrific a season ago. 30th in the league, surrendered more than 28 points per game. They allowed more than 30 points in 9 games, tied with the Dolphins for the most in the league. Yes, they've added some fresh faces. James Bradbury, Blake Martinez, you'd hope would upgrade that overall talent level. But when we look at the Steelers offensively, Payne, where do we think Big Ben starts the campaign? We've seen him historically underachieve in season openers, but this is a quarterback who openly admitted, hey, I'm going to be shaking like a leaf, assuming the reins under center again for Pittsburgh.
I'm really excited to see what the Steelers offense looks like with Big Ben. And to your point, and one that we made on the preview podcast, is I doubt Big Ben returns to the 2018 form. We've only seen him play for about 6 quarters without Antonio Brown. But what I do expect is a quarterback that's at least going to be decisive, and that's something that this offense didn't have with Rudolph and Duck Hodges last season. I think Ben gets the ball out quick, and if you go back to his last full season, Big Ben got the ball out at the fastest rate in the league among qualifying quarterbacks, 2.55 seconds. I think that's also going to help everyone around him. The offensive line regressed heavily, partly because Mike Munchak left town, but some of the guys got a little bit older. And last year, Pittsburgh, their O-line allowed, they were 31st in pressure rate allowed. And tonight, I think the key, again, getting the ball out just a little bit quicker, because starting guard David DeCastro is out for this game. So I fully expect when Big Ben passes, it's going to be quick. I think that's probably the best way to attack, especially the Giants in their secondary, because if you look where the Giants have been really good last year and based on their personnel this year, is probably going to be stopping the run. They were top 7 last year in defensive rush efficiency, 3rd in rushing success rate defense. If you look on early downs, the way to get to the Giants was throwing the ball. Teams that passed on first or second down against the Giants last season, they were successful on 52% of those throws. So it doesn't make sense to me to try to ram the ball down the Giants' throat up the middle. The other thing that I'm at least interested to see from the Steelers offense, and it's flying under the radar a little bit, Todd, you have a new quarterback coach in Matt Canada. And I'm not sure how much of his fingerprints are going to be on the offense for game 1, but everything that we have heard a little bit sounds promising. Now, actions always speak louder than words, but what I am hearing and what we should fully expect from this offense is a little bit more misdirection, more pre-snap motion, more play action. And even though 11 personnel is the Steelers' main offensive formation, I'm hearing to expect some heavy sets with both Ebron and Vance McDonald on the field together. Now, I'm not sure 12 is the route you're going to go tonight, with this run defense of the Giants. I think that, again, more quick passing. And if you look, the New York Giants defense last year allowed 4.7 yards per carry on rushes from 3 wide receiver sets, but 3.3 yards from 2 tight end sets. So I think long term, we're going to see a little bit more 12. But tonight, I think we really should see an offense that throws the ball quickly from 11 personnel. But Big Ben's going to help everything about this offense. It's going to help the ground game in totality. We saw last year, Steelers were dead last in EPA on rushes. So Big Ben back, a healthy James Conner should really help things. Aside from that, you're looking at a Giants secondary that needs to be tested. They went out, drafted Xavier McKinney early. He injured his foot. So he's having, he had surgery. He's out. DeAndre Baker was released after the off-field incident. So if you look...
Poor choices, DeAndre. Poor choices, my friend.
And there was a sign of that. Didn't he leave? Like, it's one thing, I'm fine, not playing in the meaningless bowl if you're going to be a high-end draft pick, but the team didn't even know where he was. If you remember that, Kirby Smart was like, I haven't seen or heard from him. He's like went back home to Florida, I guess, and no one saw or heard from him the final 6 weeks of the season. So it's kind of a telling sign to me that this might be a thing, something for things to come. I just didn't really love what DeAndre Baker was, I guess, as a human. Now he's young, and he'll probably have a chance to rebound here at some point. Someone will give him a shot. But with those guys out of the secondary, you saw, the Giants were forced to sign Logan Ryan, and then they traded for Isaac Yiadom. I'm not sure how much those guys are going to be able to contribute tonight because they've only been with the team about 2 weeks, only been practicing with them for about a week. So, I think it's vital that you want to attack those guys. We know when you're playing the Steelers offense, you have to worry about covering the slot. And that's a big question mark with this Giants defense right now. Juju gets his quarterback back. He runs 66% of his routes from the slot. He is a fantastic run after the catch guy. If you look at his first 2 seasons combined, averages nearly 7.5 yards after the catch. And so Logan Ryan, to me, from what I'm hearing, is going to be on a limited snap count. They're going to use him in nickel. They're going to use him in the slot. Maybe they'll use him as a blitzer. But if he is on the field on these nickel situations, he played in the slot 58% of his snaps last year. Gave up the most receptions and yards of any slot corner in the league. So I'm intrigued to see how the Giants defend that. You also look at James Bradbury. Was brought in, but he's going to be on the outside. So most likely it's going to be Deontay Johnson who Bradbury is seeing. I thought he had a fantastic rookie year. I think he's ready to take that next step. Led all rookie receivers with 3.6 yards of separation per route run last year. 87% of his routes were ran on the outside. So that's likely who Bradbury is going to defend. So it comes down to who's going to man the slot. And I think that's the matchup that we really want to watch. I think it's also important. You got to get James Conner out, catching balls out of the backfield. Get him going in the screen game. Get him out on some choice routes. Giants were bottom 10 in both receptions allowed and yards allowed to running backs. Blake Martinez, who you mentioned, was signed this offseason. He's really been pretty poor in coverage, although last year he was fantastic. So it was a contract year, and he had his best year in coverage. Let's see if that continues here, but you certainly want to test him and the Giants linebackers in coverage with James Conner out of the backfield. So those are the couple of things that I would look for on this side of the ball. Do the Steelers go quick passing? Are they going to attack the slot? And do they get James Conner operating out of the backfield in the pass game? Because I think there's opportunities if Pittsburgh attacks that way.
When you look at the other side of the ball, the Giants offense, obviously the reason for optimism is around Daniel Jones and the way he finished his rookie campaign. 18 touchdowns and 5 picks over the final 7 starts of that season compared to his first 5 games where he had 6 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Passer rating jumped from a 74.9 up to a 95.4. In comes Jason Garrett and Freddie Kitchens to help manage the offense. I know a lot of people out there are probably laughing, but I think these guys make much better soldiers than they do generals. You look at the Giants' skill position talents. We know Saquon Barkley's the horse. Can they keep Evan Ingram healthy and on the football field? And you look at the receiving core. We know Golden Tate a little bit banged up early on, but Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard expected to contribute. Meanwhile, the Steelers defensively, Payne, they led the NFL with 54 sacks and 118 quarterback hits last season. They'll have to replace some of the productivity from Javon Hargrave. That'll be absent, obviously, him taking his talents to Philadelphia. And when you look at your boy Minkah Fitzpatrick, recorded 5 picks, a forced fumble, recovered 2 of those, and scored 2 defensive touchdowns in becoming yet another linchpin in that Pittsburgh secondary. How do we see this side of the ball unfolding tonight?
You covered a lot of ground there, and there's a few different directions we could go breaking down this side of the ball. To me, far and away, the most important matchup is in the trenches. The Giants O-line and the Steelers defensive line were polar opposites in production last year. On paper, to me, not much has changed, and this looks like where the massive advantage lies for the Steelers. Now, you're hearing the right things, as I alluded to at the top. The Giants players and coaches, the vibe seems to be much better with Joe Judge bringing over that New England mindset of energy, effort, physicality, and playing smart. So maybe that leaks into the O-line a little bit. But you look at that specific part of this matchup, and you look at Daniel Jones as a rookie, was pressured on a league-high 42% of his dropbacks. Pittsburgh led the league in pressure rate. So it's not a great matchup here. Left tackle Nate Soldier opted out. Andrew Thomas, who's supposed to be the starting right tackle, moves to left. So you've downgraded at 2 positions, and we're now expecting a rookie to fill in at left tackle in this type of offseason for a Monday night game. That's a tough ask for him. Will Hernandez just hasn't shown to be a player in the first 2 seasons either. He's given up 60 pressures from guard in 32 games. Hernandez has finished 35th and 37th in his first 2 seasons in pass blocking efficiency among guards with 100 snaps. Nick Gates won the starting center job. He's an undrafted third-year guy. He played right tackle in college, and as a reserve for the Giants last season, did get a bunch of snaps, over 200, because they're such a mess at offensive line. Kevin Zeitler is as good as it gets at guard, no worries there. Cameron Fleming, a career backup, is now starting at right tackle. So tonight, the Giants are starting basically a tier 1 guard, and then you have 3 huge question marks at left guard, center, right tackle, along with a rookie left tackle. So that's a tough ask, I think, in my mind, going against this defensive line of Pittsburgh. I thought Daniel Jones was really good, just like you did. But when you're looking at him and you factor in basically him running for his life last year, the one area that really needs to be improved in my mind is the pocket awareness and then holding on to the football. 18 fumbles for Daniel Jones last year. It led the league. It was the 5th highest fumble rate in NFL history. He fumbled it once every 45 snaps. So this is obvious, right? Turnovers equate to winning and covering spreads more than anything else, like dough. But it's not predictable, obviously. But where these 2 units were polar opposites is it starts with the pressure, and then it leads to this. The Steelers forced a turnover on 20% of their opponent possessions. That was best in the league. The Giants turned over the ball 19% of their possessions. So something has to give there tonight. Jason Garrett, as you mentioned, might be a better number 2 here as an offensive coordinator. Let's see what the game plan is. Let's see if he allows Daniel Jones to get the ball out quick. You mentioned Evan Ingram's health. He's usually not healthy, but in week 1, he should be. That's typically Daniel Jones' go-to guy. In the games that he played last year, Evan Ingram had a 22% target share. Think about the kinds of receivers the Giants have, from Sterling Shepard to Golden Tate, who is going to play but is a little bit banged up. Hopefully that quick pass game is implemented tonight, especially with your offensive line issues. But the number 1 priority has to be Daniel Jones and the ball security. Heavy dose of Saquon Barkley, most likely, when you look at not just him being a freak talent, but what Jason Garrett likes to do. He's been a run-heavy coach. It's a shortened off season. Running the ball takes the least amount of work. It's what all the quotes have been coming out of New York as, like, Saquon Barkley is going to be a huge component of this offense. They're going to run the ball a lot. He's now healthy, and I think that bodes well. If you look, last year in the 7 games that he was healthy, he averaged 142 scrimmage yards. He's going to need all of that tonight, and it'll be a fun little battle to watch because the Pittsburgh defense only gave up 100 scrimmage yards 1 time all last season. So, again, the key on this side of the ball is when you're watching this tonight, let's see if the Giants' O-line, has a stalemate. If they play below average tonight, I think that's probably a win up front. You just can't get dominated. You can't get slaughtered. You can't have Daniel Jones turning the ball over. And you might have a shot here if those things happen.
Well, if we talk about young quarterbacks on display against veterans in the early game, we'll have a similar scenario unfolding at Mile High, where it's the Tennessee Titans, now installed as 3-point road favorites at FanDuel, as they'll head in to Denver to take on the Broncos. Obviously, Payne, all sorts of optimism coming out of Denver amid Drew Lock's flourish to the end of last season. Goes 4-1 the team's final 5 games, 7 touchdowns, 3 picks, a passer rating a shade below 90. But I look at those games against the Chargers, Texans, Chiefs in a snowstorm, Lions, and Raiders, have plenty of skepticism about what we can expect from him in his sophomore campaign. And if that's not bad enough, Pro Football Focus earlier this offseason ranked Drew Lock as the worst starting quarterback in the league. And Drew Lock may be down one of his biggest weapons in Courtland Sutton, who remains very much a game-time decision dealing with an AC joint sprain.
I've been trying to go to bed early, but I'm going to be forced to watch every snap of this game, and it's because of this side of the ball right here. This side of the ball has a lot of unknowns. Like, what is Drew Lock? Can he learn this new system with Pat Shurmur in a shortened offseason and hit the ground running? You mentioned Courtland Sutton. Is he going to play? Vic Fangio said, and I quote, if Courtland Sutton can do 10 jumping jacks, he's going to be able to play. So apparently Vic hopped in the time machine, and 1980s calisthenics are the 2020 injury test and measure if you can play or not in the Broncos organization. No need for the $1 million doctors. Let's just see if he can do jumping jacks.
Well, one thing along those lines, too, and I found it interesting yesterday when I was watching ESPN's pregame show, Stefania Bell talked about they had looked at 9-player sample size for wide receivers that had a designation of questionable with the same injury. Only one had exceeded expectations going into the week, and I believe it was Julian Edelman, who obviously operates much differently in the slot than a vertical threat in Courtland Sutton. I'm curious if that shoulder doesn't have that full range of motion, if he's more of a decoy using his legs, because he's not going to be so eager to go out there and contest 50-50 balls against an underrated Titan secondary.
The more telling thing there, and you're spot on with the assessment of Courtland Sutton, but the more telling thing for me is Julian Edelman. The guy's just tough as nails. We know that. He's just a football guy. Like, he's going to be out there if he can be. We know the injuries that he's been playing through the last few years. Just an absolute warrior, so that doesn't shock me. There is some positive news, though, because nobody thought KJ Hamler could play. He's questionable tonight, but he was running at full speed the last few practices, I was told from my Denver source. So if Sutton is out, hopefully Hamler can go, but Denver's going to be relying on 2 rookies. 2 rookie receivers in week 1 in Judy and Hamler, and we know that's a position that's already tough enough to learn and be a factor in your rookie season. Now it's, again, the shortened offseason. The questions aren't just about Denver's offense either. Like, this is what's going to be intriguing to me about this matchup. Like, the Titans defense, I don't know what it is. And if Sutton's down, at least there's it's a little bit of a wash because Adoree Jackson, the Titans' #1 corner, is out with a knee injury. It's going to be tough to replace him. He led the Tennessee corners last year in yards per route run surrendered. Vrabel thought this was a year that everything would come together for Adoree, and he was going to take that next step and be a true shutdown #1 corner. But we talked about this again on the preview podcast. You did a good job trying to cause some drama there with my Vrabel comment. I don't think he's Dan Quinn yet, but we did see this defense the first 2 years of Vrabel. They've been below average in defensive efficiency, but really they trended horrifically last year against the pass. The final 10 games, Tennessee was 30th in passing success rate defense, 21st in explosive pass defense. The Titans defense gave up 8 points more the final 10 games than they did the first 6. Now your #1 corner's out. But you have to wonder if Drew Lock can take advantage of that in game 1, a new system, banged up receiving core, and a slew of rookies. And you hit on this perfectly at the top. As great as the 4-1 finish was on paper, Drew Lock wasn't really tested. And if you dive deeper into some of these metrics, and it's why PFF, as you alluded to, anointed him the worst potential starting quarterback this year, it's because some of these numbers were really horrific when you dig into them. In the 4 wins down the stretch, Drew Lock played defenses with an average efficiency ranking of 27th. The defenses were 26th in defensive pass efficiency, 25th in explosive pass defense. But if you start to look at how Lock performed against those defenses, any throw that wasn't a short throw, he was terrible. Lock graded out the worst passer on throws of 11 or more yards. And if you start to look at some of the ranges within those throws past 11 yards, on throws of 11 to 15 yards, Lock was 13% below NFL average. 22% below average. On throws, 16 to 20 yards. And on deep throws of 21 plus yards, Lock's accuracy was 21% below an average quarterback. Most of the passing yards were receivers doing work after the catch. 53% of Lock's passing yards came after the catch. So I don't know what to expect there. I think we also have to have questions about the Broncos' offensive line. What does that look like in front of Drew Lock? You had right tackle Juwan James opt out. Lloyd Cushenberry is a rookie center starting. We know that's one of the most valuable positions on the field. He was a poor pass blocker at the college level at LSU. Garrett Bowles is apparently in the best mental and physical shape he's ever been in, but he finished 45th in pass blocking efficiency last year among qualifying tackles. He has 45 penalties in 3 seasons. That's the most in the NFL over that stretch. And you're looking, as a whole, Denver's offensive line was 27th in pass blocking win rate last year. I'm not sure where the improvement's going to potentially come from there. All of the matchup analysis is great. But the one thing I think we really have to figure out in this game is when you look at this number and assess it, you have revenge from last year. You have a new system for a young quarterback. You have the loss of Von Miller, potentially Cortland Sutton. Is that worth a 6-point move? If you go back when this line opened, Buckeye used Denver -3. Now, obviously, some of that is the home field advantage, but we're now at 3.3 here when you factor in the juice. So we've touched one key at open. We're trending through another. I think, could be wrong, but I think if this gets to 3.5, we're going to see a group come in at kick and grab 3.5, because the one thing that seems to be forgotten is the home field advantage in Denver, and I know fans aren't going to be there, but where their home field advantage lies is with the elevation and the altitude. And if you look at the historical data here, since the merger, Denver is 51-9-2 when playing home games the first 2 weeks of the season. Whatever it is, playing at the elevation early in the season, it's tough because teams aren't in the best shape. You would think that's probably, I don't know if it's more of a thing because Denver's also probably not in their typical shape, but there was a shortened camp, obviously. We know playing at altitude and elevation is a shock to the system. Denver practices in it every day. Most other teams do not. So it's about, not feeling comfortable being able to breathe, and that's really been where this Denver home field advantage lies, not necessarily the fans being there. So I think at 3.5, we're going to see some buyback here, Todd.
You mentioned the Broncos defense, and real quick, want to touch on this side of the ball a little bit. The absence of Von Miller, but of course they get Mr. Chubb back, his running mate, which we thought was going to make a tremendous pass rushing tandem there. Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson, arguably a top 5 safety tandem, but you do have a banged up cornerbacking unit for this Denver side. And you look at the Titans offensive line, a major weakness last year, allowed the 3rd most sacks. No Jack Conklin, Isaiah Wilson, who knows what the hell he's doing and how focused he is on playing football when you're getting pulled over as a rookie for a DUI. In steps Ryan Tannehill, officially the starting quarterback now with that massive deal. We know A.J. Brown is an aspiring number 1. Clearly took that mantle last year, 50-plus catches, over 1,000 yards receiving. And Derrick Henry, the bell cow in the backfield. Do you see a particular matchup advantage with the Titans offense against this Broncos defense before we put a bow on the nightcap of tonight's game?
The one thing with this matchup, there's not going to be a lot of surprises. The Titans run a very vanilla offense. It's extremely effective, so I don't knock them for that. Arthur Smith stunned all of us last year as a first-time OC and play caller. And from what I have heard, he's not overly analytical, but he arrived at the right answers. He just took a different path last year to get to them. All the things that we talk about that works, right? Pre-snap motion, play action, all that stuff helps an offense. It helps a quarterback. Arthur Smith did it, even though he's not this analytics guy. If you look, pre-snap motion increased year over year for Tennessee. Play action increased a ton. The Titans used the 5th most play action on early downs in the first 3 quarters. 30% of Tannehill's passes last year came off play action, completed 77% of those throws. Passer rating of 143, averaged 13.5 yards per pass attempt off play action. That's how the Titans like to throw it. What was interesting to me when I went back and looked at that Week 6 matchup last season where these two teams played each other, I assumed going in that Mariota starting, Vic Fangio would just load the box to stop Derrick Henry. But if you look at that game, Derrick Henry saw an 8-man box just 20% of the time. It was 15% below what Derrick Henry faced as a regular season rate. So it shocked me that they didn't sell out to stop the run, especially with Mariota struggling, and there was whispers that he would potentially be replaced, and ultimately he was in this game. But if you look, even when Denver faced these heavy sets last year from Tennessee, 1.2 yards per rush allowed. So that really helped the Broncos defense last year. They're able to stop the run without committing a lot of guys to the box to do it. So I'm really intrigued to see how Vic chooses to defend tonight. The Broncos quarters situation, I think, you mentioned a couple nagging injuries, but I think they're in a better place health-wise with A.J. Bouye and Bryce Callahan. And, we know what Justin Simmons is, one of the best cover safeties in the league. I think it makes for a potentially nice secondary. And it's going to be vital now with Von Miller out that maybe Vic's forced to blitz a little bit more. And if he does, he's going to need to rely on his secondary to be able to cover man-to-man a little more. I also want to see the thing here is with Jurrell Casey. How does he factor into this game? Obviously, a revenge night for him. If you heard his quotes, he basically said that Tennessee traded him and they just threw him to the trash. The exit wasn't pleasant. No one really spoke to him. So going back to the top here with this Titans vanilla offense, has Jurrell Casey laid out every element of this Titans offense to Vic Fangio in preparation for this? And we know offenses are going to change their play calls. They're going to change their verbiage. They change their signals every offseason. But I'm sure Arthur Smith has had to spend extra time doing that with Jurrell Casey on the other sideline. That said, this is a completely different beast than the one Denver faced last season. So I don't want to really use the complete comparison. They got a glimpse of Tannehill when he came off the bench cold in the final quarter and a half last year. But Tannehill didn't make his actual start until week 7. And at that point, Tennessee's offense completely changed. They went from an offense that was 31st in passing success rate, 29th in overall success rate, 20th in explosive passing. But with Tannehill, when he took over, it was an offense that was 3rd in passing success rate, the most explosive in all of football. Titans were number 2 in passing EPA the final 11 weeks with Tannehill. So this is a much different beast that the Broncos defense has to face this year than the one that they faced a year ago.
Two teams with a bevy of questions. Of course, we'll see if Tennessee was a flash in the pan for their run of the AFC Championship last year, or if the Denver Broncos can realize some of that sleeper status that people have bestowed on them. Hopefully for us, they don't get to 500 this season, but that's a different discussion for a different day, quite obviously. Plenty of great analysis, not only on what we saw so far for week 1, but what you can expect tonight for the Giants and Steelers, and of course the Titans and Denver Broncos. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there, and most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. We'll have some big announcements coming there over the next week or so in regards to the return of the college football podcast as well. As Payne mentioned, 5-star reviews, iTunes, contests, plenty of great swag available for you, our loyal listeners, that continue to power the engine that grows by the day that is this fine podcast platform. Payne, before we close up shop, any final thoughts, words of wisdom before we take a 72-hour hiatus of sorts and reconvene on Thursday?
No, that's it. We ran a little long for a Monday here, but there was a lot of stuff that we discovered and saw in week 1, and we talked about potentially there being need for more of an adjustment between weeks 1 and week 2 than we typically have, right? Our approach and mindset is don't overreact to 60 minutes of football, but we didn't get to see any of these teams play in the preseason. Little things, right? Who's going to be the third receiver? What formations are these teams going to rely on? What does the distribution of targets and carries look like? So I think even though we don't want to overreact, there was a lot to cover here for this Monday, I guess, look back at a weekend podcast, because there was so much that we didn't know what was going to happen. So I think we did a good job uncovering some things. We could have went for about 4 hours here. There's so much, and I still have to, after we get off this show, look at a bunch more things that unfolded on Sunday. So it was fun to chat. We'll be back in 72 hours.
Sounds good for all those folks that will inevitably have investments on tonight's Monday Night Football game. We wish you the best of luck as always. And come late in the evening, hopefully we see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.